The idea of moving objects with the power of mind alone has been a human goal for millennia. But over the last few years, researchers have actually made some welcome progress. These technologies have the potential to allow paralyzed people to regain the use of their limbs. My name is Jan Petrowski and I'm the online science and technology editor of The Economist. And with me is Paul Markilly, the innovation editor. So Paul, what have the researchers come up with?
The latest work is Jose Contreras Vidal at the University of Houston. And what they've done there is, following on some previous work that he and his colleagues have done, is to use EEG, which is measuring the signals from the brain at the scalp as opposed to using an implant in the brain, and using those signals as a means of operating bionic legs. And in this case, where they're hoping the work will lead with some trials that are coming up with disabled people, is to get those people to think about walking. The cap that detects these signals will transmit those signals wirelessly to the legs, and the legs will respond accordingly.
So why has this been so much of a challenge? From what I understand, there has been some research for a while now which has enabled people to use such EEG caps, for instance, to control a pinball machine or to fly a virtual helicopter in 3 dimensions. Why is walking more difficult?
Well, walking involves an awful lot of the brain. It may seem a fairly simple exercise and maybe something you don't think about, but there's decision making, there's motor reflexes, there's a number of things going on. Now, it has been possible before to use implants in the brain to measure this electric activity. But by using a cap with the EEG probes on, you can obviously do that without an intrusive operation.
Now, so far as I understand, the implants, they provide a very rich signal of what exactly is going on in the brain. However, they carry with them certain risks, for instance, the risk of an infection getting in through the implant. Plus, it's obviously a very intrusive way to gauge brain activity. And electroencephalography, EEG, which is the technology that ScalCap uses, is much less intrusive and therefore perhaps much more broadly applicable.
Yes, it has, and what they've done in Houston is to be able to reduce the number of electrodes that they need to actually pick up these signals. I mean, you're using a second-hand signal, if you like, as opposed to the ones you're measuring directly from the brain. They've used 30 or more electrodes in the past to be able to do things like move a cursor on a screen or indeed play pinball by thinking about it. And they've got this one down to 12 electrodes. What they're doing, in effect, is listening to the symphony rather than the individual instruments in the brain.
Okay, so how does the training proceed? Does a patient simply strap on these bionic legs and they can start walking, or do they need to learn to use them?
That's the bit they're coming into now. What would happen, and this is what the researchers say, is that you'd have a memory of walking, and what you do is just think about walking, and the legs will respond because they're using able-bodied volunteers to establish what these brain patterns are first of all, and then if you detect the same brain patterns in someone who's paralyzed, the legs will respond accordingly.
So what about people who have been paralyzed from birth? Would these technological advances help them too?
They're not sure, but it's possible. You wouldn't have a memory of walking, but you would be able to see walking, and you can see what people do when they're walking, and you know what walking is, and that just may be enough to have an effect to enable this to work as well. I mean, that's something they've yet to show.
Okay, so moving on to the arm, which is in fact a much more complicated bit of apparatus than legs at the neural level. However, researchers at Brown University in Rhode Island have come up with a way to allow quadriplegic patients, paralyzed from the neck down, to move a robotic arm and in fact to grab a bottle and drink coffee from it.
Yeah, that's been a remarkable piece of work, and it's been something in one of the particular cases. The participant there, the lady, had not been able to help herself for a drink for nearly 15 years after suffering a stroke, and she was able to look at this robotic arm and manipulate it just by thinking about the procedures she wanted the arm to go through, and to pick up a flask of coffee to swing it towards her and for her to be able to drink out of this with a straw. How they would train you to do that is that, first of all, she would look at the robotic arm going through a series of movements and think about as if she was trying to control that arm. And then you take those signals as you've picked them up and then look for them when she tries to operate the arm on her own accord.
Okay. This, because moving an arm and grasping an object is a much more complicated bit of mental work, this required the brain implants. Is there any chance of electrodes, of EEG skull caps doing the same job?
In theory, I suppose it depends how good you get at signal processing. I mean, at the moment, the implant in the brain, what those researchers have shown is that that implant was done quite a long time ago, and it was still functional, and it picks up a rich enough signal to do it. So it would very much depend on how good signal processing becomes and how good perhaps an EEG cap system could be. I mean, that system they are hoping to make smaller and lighter and also connect wirelessly to the equipment.
Either way, it's a very welcome piece of progress for people who are paralyzed and therefore cannot engage in everyday activities.
It is indeed, and it comes alongside some big advances being made in bionics, in the mechatronics, if you like, of artificial legs and robotic arms. And the two together are holding out a lot of promise.
If you want to find out more about this amazing research, go to economist.com and click on the Science and Technology tab. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Jan.
The Economist.